Bush Radio.
Bush Radio. Bush Radio.
Bush Radio.
Your real talk radio.
State Affairs with Edmund Obilo is live.
Dr. Moghalu, let's look at the global economy again. More than 1.5 billion people risk losing their livelihoods as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And this is coming from the International Labour Organization.
Well, I mean, the world is going into a massive recession. There's no question about it. Something that will be in the order of economic impact of the Great Depression, maybe even more, but coming in a different way. The Great Depression lasted for a decade. This is an event that will happen over a year, maximum 18 months, but it's going to have such a huge impact just because of the globalized nature of the world economy today. So America, has 30 million people who have filed for unemployment. So yes, what is happening is a massive recession caused by the coronavirus, a combination of the coronavirus and the crash in oil prices. And the crash in oil prices also has something to do with the fact that the coronavirus has made many economies far less productive as people stay home. Lockdowns have meant much less productivity. So the GDP of many countries is just going to go into the negative column. And Nigeria will fall into a recession projected to be minus 3%. And it's going to be one of the worst recessions we've ever had as a country. Perhaps the worst ever.
Perhaps the worst ever. Looking at the United States, I'm wondering, death toll is more than 60,000, and this has surpassed the number of Americans killed in the 2 decades of the Vietnam War. Is this a shift in world politics? Are we saying arms don't really matter anymore?
No, that's not what we're saying, but what the world powers have learned. I mean, the coronavirus has humbled every country in the world, including the great powers like the United States and even China. The indices of power are changing. And many people around the world who are perceptive can see that just being militarily strong is not enough. Because this country, the United States and many countries, their health systems have been challenged. Their response to the coronavirus has shown huge weaknesses that they did not anticipate. So it's a humbling experience for every country. United States, for Nigeria, for South Africa, for everywhere. So it doesn't mean that military or arms don't matter. They still do in a conventional sense. But a lot of the strategic global security threats are no longer conventional. And the world and its countries have to prepare themselves accordingly.
As you break down some of these figures, there's this fear, this palpable fear in Africa. And if you listened to IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva last week, she was saying that emerging markets and developing countries need trillions of dollars in financial support. Must Africa get this support all the time?
Well, I mean, Africa's economies are weak. So, as a very short-term measure, they will probably have no choice but to seek external support from the International Monetary Fund. I know that the IMF has set up a fund, for interventions in various countries around the world, developing countries. But I think that African countries have to learn a lesson from this and then recalibrate their revenue generation and create savings funds that can allow them to operate at times like this. This is the lesson for Nigeria. We have no savings, no fiscal savings, and we are deeply into debt. Nigeria is borrowing far more than it can pay, and that's a huge threat. We're going into a very vicious cycle where we're borrowing a lot, and our ability to repay is going down because oil is what we rely on, and its price has gone to the floor. So we face the possibility of a sovereign debt crisis if care is not. And I think, after COVID, we have to go back to the drawing board in Nigeria, for example. And that's why I say that nothing short of constitutional restructuring is going to answer the question, the challenge that Nigeria faces in a post-COVID era.
Looking at Europe, Europe has agreed a plan to inject 540 billion euro as financial support to weak economies. But if you look at the figures today, the Eurozone economy shrank at the sharpest pace on record in the first quarter. Are we gradually easing to a new world economic order?
Well, I don't know what the nature of that world economic order will be, but you know that in global economics, there will always be cycles, of growth, the cycles of decline and slumps and even recessions. So the coronavirus has created such a huge economic shock. And every part of the world, even China, is affected. Its economy is affected. But some parts of the world will recover faster than others. The Western countries and China will likely recover faster than African countries and, Asian countries that I think for now are the least affected. So I see the aspect of the world economic order that I see that will be somewhat new is an unraveling of a lot of the areas of globalization. China, for example, has been the world's factory for so many decades. And I think a lot of countries are going to move to alternative supply chains away from the Chinese or create more local supply chains. So that's just one thing you're going to see out of the COVID crisis. You're going to also see a big struggle between the United States and China for global power. That struggle will sharpen and accentuate in the years to come.
Will that struggle lead to the third scramble for Africa?
Well, you may ask yourself if that is not already happening. The Chinese are very dominant in many African countries. A lot of African countries have behaved like an abused spouse, who looks to the next person that smiles at him or her and thinks maybe this is the one that is for me, but it may not necessarily be so. So African countries feel that the West has not treated them well and they have embraced China, but they've found out in recent times that the Chinese have been no different. World powers engage on or for their interests. They are not engaging for your interests. And that is the world view that Africans need to understand. They need to have their own global strategic intent. So in your relationship with China, what are you trying to get out of it? Are you just looking for people to come and build stadiums for you or build roads, but supplying Chinese labor to do the job when you have millions of people unemployed in your own country? These are the kinds of questions that we need to engage and reflect in our policy as we deal with China. And I think African countries need to have a more self-reliant approach to international political economy than shifting from one global power to the other.
Perhaps this is the time Africans should begin to read your book. And for those who have read it before, perhaps it's the time to reread the book, Emerging Africa, How the Global Economy's Last Frontier Can Prosper and Matter. Tell me more.
Well, I wrote Emerging Africa about 6 years ago, and a lot of the arguments I made in that book have been borne out to be true. First, I made the point that Africa is not rising. I wrote that book when people were giddy with the Africa rising sensation. And I said, what is the basis on which you say that Africa is rising? Have our economies become industrially productive? Have we now become innovation-based economies? What are the skills levels, in our economies or of our human capital? So I raised those fundamental questions and I answered them and said, Africa is not rising. China is rising. Africa is emerging. Africa is emerging as a place of interest for foreign investors. But let us understand that we should not just be a market for the products of globalization. We have to strive to become a factory too. We have to play the globalization game by becoming part of the production value chain of globalization. If you are not in that value chain, then you're just a market and you're not rising, and you shouldn't be deceiving yourself that you're rising simply because your GDP is rising. GDP rising is not the same thing as economic transformation. Your GDP can rise on the basis of a commodity boom like oil or anything else, or copper or nickel or gold. But that doesn't mean you're taking millions of your citizens out of poverty, which is what is necessary, The GDP per capita should rise. The structure of the economies of African countries like Nigeria and others have to change.
In the book, you talked about the irresistible shift of global power to the East.
Yes.
And you made the point that it has to do with worldviews. When will it shift to Africa?
When Africa develops its own worldview, which is to say, a view of the world and Africa's place in the world, and a global strategic ambition to dominate or at least emerge to become a middle power continent, that is when it will shift. And to give Africans the skills that make them competitive in the global economy, that is when it will be Africa's century. Whether that will be in this century or the next one, I think it depends on Africa's leaders and African people themselves. There's a lot of work to do, but it is not impossible. China did it in 40 years. It is possible that we could do it in 50 to 60 years if we are serious starting now.
Can Nigeria lead that ambition?
If it has leaders that have a worldview that includes that sort of ambition. If you keep electing leaders whose ambitions are to ensure that their ethnic groups dominate every other ethnic group, you will never, we will continue to be like crabs in a basket, each one pulling each other down. That's what Nigeria is today. So it depends on the type of leadership that we can elect in Nigeria. If you elect a leadership that has a global worldview of strategic ambition and has the philosophical understanding, the mindset to lead Nigeria to become a modern 21st century nation, then it can happen. But until then, I'm sorry, it's not going to happen, regardless of whatever we wish.
The program is State Affairs. I am discussing with Dr. Kingsley Moghalu, a former deputy governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria. Moghalu was the presidential candidate of the YPP in the 2019 presidential election in Nigeria. He is a distinguished non-resident fellow and senior fellow counsel on emerging market enterprises, the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, Tufts University, United States of America. Reading your book tells me that you understand how the world works. In that case, you aspired to be a Nigerian leader, but you did not succeed in 2019. When will you try again?
That's a very interesting question. I succeeded in 2019 in some very important and strategic ways. I showed my candidacy for president, showed Nigerians what is possible. I think we try to give Nigerians a sense of what a Nigerian leader should look like, sound like, and act like. And I think many people's minds and hopes have been awakened by the fact that someone like me ventured into the political terrain. And to that extent, that is a strategic achievement. Now, the future is still another country, and I haven't got the visa to it yet. I have made no decisions about, whether I will contest again in 2023, because I'm still observing the situation. And I'm focused for now on my professional life because I must put food on the table for my family. I am not a career politician. I'm not one of those who have stolen public funds and have nothing else to do and no other competence but to be politicking with free and easy money. Since I'm not in that category, I must face, my primary assignment, which is to take care of my family while I continue to lend my voice to the issues of the day and to give advice and suggestions as to how things can get better. There's nothing much more I can do beyond that. Nigerian politics requires a lot of financial investment. It requires a lot of money. So that is certainly a handicap. So if millions of Nigerians decide to come together and put money on the table and say they want a president like Kingsley Moghalu, here's the money, come out again. Certainly, I'm available to serve.
So you are leaving that decision to the Nigerian people, not to you?
Well, it's a shared decision because you cannot go beyond where a society is at a particular point in time. You can take a horse to the stream, but you cannot force it to drink, as the proverb goes. So we will be monitoring the situation in the period ahead to see how people feel.
You know, some would say Dr. Moghalu has chickened out.
I'm not intimidated by those kinds of things because, you can say whatever you like, but have you come out the way I have come out? Why don't you come out? Must it be more relevant? I'm only one of 200 million Nigerians. I have made the sacrifice of risking life and limb and my own, meager personal resources to pursue a vision. So, I don't think that is a relevant statement at all. I have to be practical because I'm not running for the sake of running. I ran to win, and I have to assess what are the chances of winning and whether the resources are available. If the resources are not available, how can you run effectively? That's the issue. So anybody who is saying Moghalu has chickened out, well, put some 10 billion naira on the table or 15 or 20 billion and ask me to step out for the presidency and then see whether I do or not. If at that point I don't, then you can say I've chickened out.
Because they also accuse you of abandoning your political party, YPP.
I did not abandon any political party at all. I think that's just a wrong notion. I have taken a strategic withdrawal from partisan politics at this time because I recognize that the real challenge is electoral reform. And I have convened a non-partisan group, called To Build a Nation. And we are campaigning for a reform of the electoral system. Without reforming the electoral system, it doesn't matter whether you belong to the YPP or to the ZPP. It doesn't matter. You will not be able to take the presidency outside of the APC or the PDP. Those are the two behemoths in the space at this time. And this democracy needs to be opened up so that everybody has access to opportunity. That's the real battle we should be fighting, not expecting somebody to be wasting his or her time in some vanity, an exercise in vanity. I'm not a vain person. I don't do things, just to impress or to entertain myself. I go to the root of the matter, and that's what I'm doing by fighting with other Nigerians for electoral reform. So it is a shift of focus. It is not an abandonment of, but to do it effectively, I decided to leave the YPP so that I could operate and mobilize people across all parties so that we can reform the electoral system because it's in the vested interest of all of us. That's just what I've done.
Is it not possible for intellectuals like you to move into either PDP or APC and reform the parties, use the structure to give Nigerians good life?
It is possible. If there is, that is a possibility that must be considered by all people who think like myself. The possibility of moving a critical mass of intellectuals and people who think in a modern and different way into any of the two political parties, APC or PDP, and becoming a critical mass and influencing and reforming the nature of politics. Yes, that is an option that must be on the table, realistically speaking.
Before we go, how are you coping with the pandemic in the United States?
Well, I'm under lockdown with my family, so just like everybody else. So a lot of things, we're spending more quality family time together. Children are studying online, and I'm pursuing my professional activities, via Zoom and Skype as we're doing now, like everybody else. So, it's a time for reflection. It's a time to be taking opportunity off, for families to come together. It's a time to strategize for the future and understand that a lot about how we proceed in life is going to change. It's a time to slow down from the mad rush of life as we have come to know it in the last few years. So it's going to be a significantly altered world going forward, and I think we all should adjust ourselves to that reality.
You are a distinguished non-resident fellow and senior fellow counsel on emerging market enterprises, the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, Tufts University, United States. What does this role entail?
Well, as you know, I have been a professor of international business and public policy, a professor of practice at the Fletcher School at Tufts University in Boston. I left that role to come back to Nigeria to run for the presidency. And so since then, I have been a distinguished non-resident fellow at the school and a member of the Council on Emerging Market Economies. And in that role, we research, we analyze opportunities in the emerging markets, how the economies of the emerging markets are developing, how the business structure and innovation coming out of the emerging markets is impacting and interacting with the world economy. Those kinds of issues are things we look at. The Fletcher School is one of the most prestigious graduate schools of international affairs in the world. And I happen to be an alumnus of the school. I took my master's degree there and I took my PhD at the London School of Economics. So it was an honor to be an alum of the Fletcher School, and let alone to become a professor at the Fletcher School. I was the only a black man or woman on the faculty of the Fletcher School while I was a professor there. It's a very good, distinguished institution, and I'm very proud of my affiliation with it. Of course, but it did not stop me from my commitments to my country, Nigeria. And in fact, it was while I was teaching at the Fletcher School that I said to myself, listen, you are teaching 30 students here who in another 10, 15 years, some of them will be the Secretary of State of the United States. Some will be like Bill Gates. Some will be, in the CIA. All sorts of, top people emerge from these kinds of graduate professional schools of international affairs. And so I said to myself that I should go and fight for my country also, not just developing the human capital in already advanced countries. Those students were from about 30 different countries. In the Western world, in Asia, in Europe, and so on. But it's an advantage that one has, and a blessing that one is able to operate both globally and nationally in our country as well. But I must tell you that I'm pleased to have a second address, and it's a blessing, and I have no apologies to offer for it because I worked hard to attain those privileges. I sacrificed a lot, and my parents gave me a lot of inspiration and support. But I would like to make those kinds of opportunities available for as many young Nigerians as possible. And that's why I ran for president, because if I was president of Nigeria, I would create a situation where I would replicate in the thousands, if not in the millions, a lot of young people to walk the path that I have walked.
Professor Kingsley Moghalu, Thank you for featuring on State Affairs.
Thank you very much, Edmund.
Bush Radio.
Breaking down the news.